So we've now seen numerous reports detailing how Republicans in Congress are struggling to find consensus on how they're going to move forward with the next phase of coronavirus relief. You can see this headline here from the New York Times talking about how now Republicans are weighing a short-term extension to jobless aid as they struggle to find final consensus on the relief bill. We saw numerous reports. For instance, one, I will admit, rather hilarious report. Apparently, Rand Paul either stormed out of a meeting or was quite upset in a meeting and said that the Republican meeting was basically just a bunch of Bernie bros because they were talking about extending programs and extending benefits for people. And he said that they were trying to spend too much money and that made them Bernie bros. I'll tell you what, I doubt it. I doubt that Mitch McConnell was in there as a Bernie bro. But nonetheless, that does, I think, detail for us an interesting facet of the Republican Party right now, which is that there are a number of Republicans in Congress right now who are interested in some kind of relief program. It's unlikely that even they are going to be, as interested in going quite as far as some Democrats, especially AOC or Bernie Sanders and the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. But it does show us, I think, a quite interesting divide in the Republican Party right now, which is that there are Republicans out there who are more interested in some kind of serious relief program, and then some Republicans out there who are just basically saying, no, what we want to do is stick to the sort of fiscal conservative. We're worried about the deficit. We've seen numerous Republicans coming out saying that we're worried about the deficit right now and that that's a really big problem. But we're seeing other Republicans as well chiding those members of Congress, saying that actually this is not the time to be worrying about the deficit. So it is a very fascinating divide that we're starting to see open up in the Republican Party. But I want to talk a little bit about the Democratic response to this, because one of the things that a lot of people have observed about this is that the Democrats are being rather quiet. The Democrats in Congress aren't really saying too much about what they want. Nancy Pelosi basically saying that she wants some kind of $3 trillion package, the same one more or less that they passed about a month ago, and saying that that should stand as their next phase, right? That's the thing that they want, but they're not actually running around, advocating for specific things that they want to see in the Republican offer up so that, to reconcile early on. And this goes into the general Democratic strategy, which is going on right now that Democrats are trying to run in terms of winning the election in November, which is that Joe Biden, as you all know right now, as we've detailed on this channel, his main strategy right now, and you look at the polls right now, the strategy is working. Joe Biden's main strategy is to hide out, don't do too much, don't rock the vote too much, and let Donald Trump sort of tie himself up. Let Donald Trump hang himself with his own, mistakes, etc. when it comes to this coronavirus stuff. And so far, that has absolutely been working for Joe Biden. We've detailed on this channel how right now in the polling aggregate, Joe Biden is leading anywhere by not either 9 points or 11 points. We've now seen 2 polls in the past week where Donald Trump is losing to Joe Biden by 15 points. So the strategy which Joe Biden and by extension now the rest of the Democratic Party is doing right now is working. It is working. Now, I'm not sure that it's a strategy which I particularly like, because of course we might be able to get a lot more if Democrats were actively out there campaigning for specific things, saying this thing must be in any kind of bill. This other thing here is the thing that we want, right? Even if those things aren't as far as I would like, I do think that actively campaigning for a specific thing would make it more likely that that thing would probably get in the bill. I don't think that that's a far stretch to say. But Democrats know if they were to run around and actively start campaigning for a specific thing, it might hurt them in the polls, right? Because then voters would begin to associate that specific thing with the Democratic Party, and then it begins to divide about whether or not those voters agree with that specific thing, right? And so the hope is of the Democratic Party is just to basically make the Republican Party look like they're completely incompetent. In fact, this is actually part of what the Democratic Party is doing right now by not giving them any information or hardly any information about the things that they actually want, right? Because it makes it more difficult for Republicans to reconcile their own budget. This is actually a long time tactic when it comes to negotiations, right? If you want to make the other side look dumb, if you want to make the other side look incompetent, like they don't have their stuff together, don't give them any information about the things that you would or would not accept. And if you do that, then the other side is more likely to look incompetent, because if you don't give them enough information about the things that you would want or the things that you don't want, then the other side has to figure out and guess that, and that of course just leads to more infighting, more division, and it can make them look a little bit more incompetent, look a lot more incompetent. So that's the strategy which the Democratic Party is trying to run on. In other words, the strategy of Joe Biden has now become the strategy of the entirety of the Democratic Party. Now, again, I don't necessarily think that that's a good thing. I do think that that does mean that the Democrats are leaving policies out on the table, and I don't I don't like that kind of politics. Just putting it up out there. Some of you guys might think, well, that's smart tactics, that's smart strategy, and I'll be honest, it might win them a few more votes. It really might. But I think at the end of the day, Democrats should be maybe a little bit more worried about getting those specific things that they think are the right things to get. That said, though, there's still the question, though, of whether or not this is ultimately going to work in the long run. Because right now, in the short and medium term, it definitely seems like it's absolutely working. It definitely seems like it. Again, you look at the poll numbers that we've talked about on this channel over numerous videos. Right now, the polling does indicate a massive sweep. We're looking at situations right now where Texas is possibly in the running for Democrats for the first time in decades. So that's obviously a really, really big deal. But there is a question right now. So we just saw the other day Donald Trump giving his first coronavirus press briefing again, which he had stopped doing after there was a number of massive debacles. Now, this one was 30 minutes as opposed to the massive 2 or 3 hour press conferences where Donald Trump was basically just meandering. So this one was much more to the point, and Donald Trump was oftentimes reading off of a teleprompter, though not always. So it is possible, I will say, it is quite possible that Donald Trump now coming back in front of the cameras, but this time coming back in front of the cameras in a more sort of, formal setting, in a more kind of controlled setting where he has the teleprompter, where he's reading off of a script, and, he may not be exciting, he may be a bit boring, but he may look like he's there. He may look like, okay, well, at least he's doing something now. We've seen Donald Trump now coming out actively talking about how he believes people should wear masks. And I know that that's obviously like the least you can do. But I want to posit for you guys. Remember right now, Andrew Cuomo. In many respects, as we talked about on this channel, Andrew Cuomo, the actions which he took made New York State have some of the worst situations. They didn't lock down quick enough. Andrew Cuomo didn't act fast enough. However, as we also talked about on this channel, Andrew Cuomo's approval ratings right now, and especially even just a few weeks back, some of that has slipped, but a few weeks back especially, Andrew Cuomo's approval ratings were sky high. They were sky high. Why? Because he was up front and center. Everybody saw him. And at the end of the day, for a lot of people, that's what it takes to win re-election. That's what it takes for people to say, well, it looks like he's doing something because I see him on TV every day, so he must be doing his job, right? And so I'm not going to sit here and say that this couldn't work. I'm not going to sit here and say that Donald Trump's new attempt to run out and to be, sort of controlled for, 30 minutes at a time in front of it, reading from a teleprompter couldn't work. However, of course, the question that we're going to have to ask is whether or not Donald Trump is going to be able to keep that controlled composure, whether or not Donald Trump is going to be able to keep control of himself while reading from a teleprompter and not go off and say crazy things. We also saw in that 30-minute press conference, Donald Trump say something that was definitely not something that you'd want to say, saying that he wishes Ghislaine Maxwell a good time, that he hopes that she's doing all right, and wishing her well. I mean, it was bizarre. Definitely not the kind of clip, definitely not the kind of line that you would want in this particular instance. Definitely not something that clips very well for social media. Definitely not, right? So that was a bizarre moment from that press conference, and a lot of people, even on the right, were criticizing him for saying that. Like, dude, why would you say that? And definitely that was not something that you would want to say. So the question for the Republican Party, and indeed the question for the Democratic Party, whether or not this strategy of the Democratic Party is going to work, but whether it be effective. Again, I don't think that it's a good strategy, even if it necessarily is effective. But the question of whether or not it's effective is ultimately going to depend on the Republican Party and ultimately on Donald Trump. It's going to depend on whether or not Donald Trump is going to be able to listen to his advisors, and at least the good ones in the room, and stay focused on the teleprompter, and then, be a little bit more presidential, even as bizarre as that might sound. If Donald Trump can pull that off and look even just slightly competent, it's possible that Donald Trump will be able to tighten up that lead, and the Democratic response then of sort of hiding out might turn out to not be all that great. Now, again, I do think that for Joe Biden in particular, the strategy of hiding out is probably the best thing that he could possibly do. We've seen numerous clips coming out, and more or less any time that he would try to come out, he's very gaffe prone, as we've talked about on this channel. He says bizarre things that are easy to make fun of, and so, him sort of hiding out is definitely the right strategy. The question, though, is whether or not the strategy of the Democratic Party as a whole of not giving information to Republicans and then sort of letting them tie themselves, letting them hang themselves in confusion and opposition with one another, whether or not that's a good strategy, that is going to be up ultimately to Donald Trump. All right, you guys, that's the video. If you liked it, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thanks.